That's your wonderful lecture.
Thanks, Radko. That's a wonderful introduction, and I feel very humbled. It's great to be back. This is now my third time here. I love Sarajevo. I'm slowly falling in love with it each time that I come back. And it's great to have Vildana ask me yet again. I can't say I'll be back next year. I think you're still waiting to decide that with Adnan. So just to show you my confidence of interest, not because I'm showing off, but just to say I have been involved in doing some of the clinical trials in oral immunotherapy, but I haven't received any financial direct benefits. My hospital has, but not myself. So one of the interesting things, at least this is a European exercise that we did. If you ask European patients to, what's the words that come into your mind when you think about allergy? This is a sort of word cloud that gets developed. But what was really surprising to me is that treatment is it's quite small. It's not one of the major things that people think with allergy. People are worrying about health and disease and so on and so forth. But actually, increasingly, we can treat allergy. And yet, it's not up there yet in our patients' minds. And there are lots of reasons for that. And thinking of the UK context, which is the one I know best, it's hard to get hold of. Sometimes if you're in a country that's in Eastern Europe, limited resources, we don't yet have free access to adrenaline autoinjectors in Bosnia, like we were talking about yesterday at the masterclass, although it looks like it's going to be on the cards very soon, which is fantastic. Again, the power of patience in lobbying for change. But actually, treatment, we can do that so that you don't need to have your adrenaline pens. And the reason that's relevant for food allergy is because accidental reactions are common. That 1 in 8 children with peanut allergy will report having an accidental reaction every single year. And it's even more for children with milk allergy. So avoidance doesn't work on its own, even if you have a family who are being really careful with avoidance. And so people want a treatment. We know that in many countries, the reported rate of severe reactions requiring admission to hospital seems to be increasing. We know avoidance is difficult. We know accidental reactions don't just happen, but they're common. We know reactions are unpredictable. Rarely they can be fatal. And Radko had already alluded to the trial we're doing in the UK now that has been built on a child dying from food allergy. And we know that food allergy has a massive impact on quality of life of the child, of the family. It's been associated with bullying, which I'm sure is something else that will come up over this morning in some of the other talks. And we can now do something about it. And in principle, it's quite simple. It's a little bit like if you are inspired to run a marathon. I'm not one of those people. But if you are inspired to run 26 miles, you can't just do it like that. You've got to train. You've got to build up, do a few miles and a few more, and gradually train the body, careful with your diet, and then all of a sudden you can run 26 miles without significant issues, shall we say. And the same thing applies with food allergy, with desensitization. We start low. That's not going to work. So you start at the bottom end, small doses, gradually increasing over weeks and months until you get to a maintenance dose, a target dose, and then that person might be considered to be desensitized. And most studies will then do some sort of test to look at how desensitized you are. In research, that's a food challenge. In the real world, that is, for instance, you've been now able to eat 2 peanuts or 4 peanuts every single day. If you've done that for a couple of months, we know you can eat 4 peanuts every single day. We'll talk a little bit about tolerance or sustained unresponsiveness, which arguably is heading towards more of a cure, but we're not there yet. So this is a way of visualizing what we're trying to achieve. That on the one hand, let's say someone is allergic to milk. We can desensitize them so that they can now have 30 mils, a mouthful of milk, and not much happens. So that isn't going to have much impact on their life in terms of being able to have milk and cheese and yogurt in their diet. 30 mils isn't very much. But what that can do is reduce the chance of an accidental reaction. Okay? You drink someone else's milkshake by accident, or you're in a coffee shop and someone's, the wrong coffee or something like that. A mouthful of milk, not much happens, you're okay. So it reduces your risk from accidental exposures. And so that's one aim we could go for. Or we could go for the next one, desensitization to a high dose, where people can eat whatever they want that they're allergic to in their diet. So if you're allergic to peanuts, you can go and you can eat as many peanuts as you want and nothing's going to happen. High dose desensitization. You're free to eat as and when you want. And one of the issues though with that, as we'll see, is that first of all, to maintain that protection, you still need to have regular doses. And in particular for nuts and peanuts, people with those allergies hate the taste of the food. So they don't want to eat it every day. They don't want to have it in their diet. And so here we begin to see the mismatch between people like me go, oh, let's have dietary normalization, and patients who are like, my parent is forcing me to have this thing every single day, which I hate. And if you add that into the soup of bringing up a teenager who is rebelling against parental authority and wants to do their own thing, it makes for quite interesting times. So that's why we might rather want to go for sustained unresponsiveness, also called clinical remission, also called longer-term tolerance. There are lots of names for essentially the same thing, which is where you remain protected, but you don't need to have the dose every single day. You're still allergic, and maybe if you were to eat 100 peanuts rather than 4 peanuts or 1 peanut, or you to drink a liter of milk rather than just a cup of milk, you might still have anaphylaxis. But essentially, you don't have to take the dose every single day. So it's not a cure, but it's about as close to a cure as we're likely to get for treated food allergy. So we need to think, what are we actually trying to achieve here as doctors and healthcare physicians, healthcare professionals? What do our patients want? And in my experience, that's often very different from what the parents want. And one of the things we have to do in London is stop parents from forcing their children to do stuff that they really don't want to do, because often the parents are more anxious than the kid is. And where is a balance where actually everyone agrees on what we should be doing? Now, does it work? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, it does work. This is a summary of 2 systematic reviews that have been done, one by the European Galen Group, another by the Canadian group at McMaster, where they've looked at, does it work, how good's the evidence, and how many people do you need to treat? So the NNT, that third column from the right, that's the number needed to treat. That's a really easy way of going, how many people do I need to treat for one person to benefit? Just an example to you, if someone in this room, I hope this isn't going to happen, was to have a heart attack right now, the number needed to treat to prevent one death by giving that person aspirin is about 66, 67. Okay, we all know aspirin is what you want to have if you're having a heart attack in the first instance. Okay, that NNT is 67. Here we're talking about number needed to treat of 2. So essentially, you treat 2 people with food allergy desensitization, and one of them will get better. Okay, treat 2 people, and you can have this massive impact. But then look at the next lines: adverse reaction, severe adverse reaction. The number needed to treat, or rather, number needed to harm, is also 2. So if I've got 2 people, one of them it will work in, and one of them will definitely have adverse events. And often it will be the same person. And there's this interesting balance between the 2. And it's not just adverse events, it's their severe adverse events as well. And one of the really interesting things with the PACE review at the bottom was the conclusion, and we'll look at this, is that you are, unlike venom immunotherapy, where your risk of anaphylaxis goes massively down once you start treatment, With food desensitization, your risk of anaphylaxis goes massively up once you start treatment. But it does work. If you look at the protection people can have from accidental reactions, and you can see on the left-hand side, that's where people start off, whether they're reacting to 1 milligram or 3 milligrams or 10 milligrams of peanut protein. One peanut is about 200 milligrams, so just to sort of give you an idea how much those amounts are. This is the degree of protection to that sort of dose. The 300 is about 2 peanuts, 1,000 is about 4 peanuts, and you can see that you're getting near 99% protection in terms of exposure to a couple of peanuts with immunotherapy in the people it works in. So it's clinically meaningful. It's not just small fry stuff we're doing here. But this is the problem, and this is the PACE review, that you'll see, this is a nice forest plot. On the left, if there's numbers on the left or the dots are on the left, that means that OIT is causing, so that means that not having treatment is associated with anaphylaxis. A line towards me means more anaphylaxis. And you can see that all the dots and diamonds there are on the right-hand side of the line, okay? There is absolutely no doubt doing food allergy or immunotherapy causes more anaphylaxis. And actually it causes more side effects for everything. Because if a person who is allergic to a food is eating that food every single day, they are going to have lots of opportunities for their body to react. And at least 50% of patients will do exactly that. And sometimes they can die. And this is really sort of the concern that we've got about people who don't know what they're doing this sort of stuff. We're seeing it a lot now in America, where you can make a lot of money out of offering food allergy treatment, where if you don't have the right systems in place, this can happen because food allergy severity is unpredictable. And if you're doing it not properly, with proper governance, not through a proper system, and I would argue not through a hospital, actually when this happens, not only is it tragic, but it might stop immunotherapy everywhere. And that is a real concern. So what do regulators, what do governments think about food allergy treatment? So in America, the ICER, which is a sort of a think tank, decided that treating peanut allergy is not better than avoiding the food. And then a whole bunch of clever people, some of those names you might recognize, threw their arms up in protest and wrote a letter into Journal of Allergy Clinical Immunology. Then the FDA in America approved something called Palforzia for peanut allergy. Palforzia is peanut powder, it's peanut flour. You can probably buy it in a shop, but if you buy it with Palforzia, you pay 10,000 times more than it will cost you in a shop. Now, there are pros and cons for that, okay? Because if you buy Palforzia, it's very well characterized, it's neat, it's easy, it's very user-friendly. It's very hard to measure out these tiny amounts in your own room, in an office, even in the pharmacy or something like that. It's also quite standardized. There's a lot of variation in how much peanut protein is in these different peanut products. But is it justified to pay 10,000 times more for something that costs peanuts from a supermarket or a shop? In the UK, our health system called the NHS decided, oh, what a good idea. And they said, we are going to fund 3,000 patients in the UK, children in the UK having Palforzia, okay? Now, since December 21, so 2, 3, 4, 3.5 years, the UK on the NHS has desensitized less than 100 because it hasn't been properly funded and for other reasons that we're going to talk about. And then in Germany, and I don't want to say the Germans are funny. I like their approach sometimes. They're very sort of practical and direct. And in contradiction to America and the UK, they were absolutely no way is this treatment good, okay? It's more harmful, it causes more anaphylaxis, it's worse for our patients. Now, I don't know how much patient input they had. And the reason that it was approved in the UK is because there was significant pressure from the patient groups for the NHS and our health regulators to cut corners in their review and to suddenly decide this is cost effective. So can it become a routine treatment? So first of all, we've got to acknowledge there's an increased risk. And probably 1 in 3 or to 1 in 4 patients will have at least one anaphylaxis reaction at home to their food at some stage when they're on treatment. And we've got to make sure families know that. Reactions are unpredictable. Okay, I've got kids who have been on a dose completely fine for a couple of months, and then out of the blue, because the moon is in Mars or Venus is in Capricorn, they have an anaphylaxis reaction. And it's completely out of the blue. And then the next day, they're completely fine again. So there is this additional unpredictability that we know exists for food allergy, but because most of our patients aren't having peanut or milk every single day, it doesn't happen. But when they are having it every single day, we get these unpredictable reactions. Often gut symptoms are very common. And the problem that we have is that parents are so worried about their child being treated that they then downplay the stomachache, the cramps, the nausea that their kid has because they want their kid to carry on. And so there's underreporting. We sometimes find out quite late that they're getting reflux or other problems. And some of you may know that one of the common causes of EOE-type symptoms, the eosinophilic esophagitis symptoms, now presenting to allergists, are patients who are undergoing food allergy immunotherapy. And they don't present anywhere near as late as they do in real life, but it might be a couple of weeks or even months before people know about it because the parents are like, it will go away. We want it to go away. We believe it will go away because we want to believe it will go away. And in the meantime, the kids are suffering. And our job is to look after the kids, not the parents necessarily. And then finally, patients who you might consider at high risk, those who are older, have higher IgE levels, have had worse reactions before, they're the ones who tend to be far more difficult to actually desensitize, but yet they're the ones who are much more likely to benefit compared to someone who's never had any issues. And one of the big ironies I have is that for the vast majority of my patients, they were completely fine until they met me. As soon as they met me and started desensitization, they're having multiple episodes of anaphylaxis, and it's all my fault. If I just left them alone, they would have been much better off. But there is this paradox. Despite that, parents and patients want treatment. And every single day, I get multiple emails from people who've read about the studies going, are you still wanting people to take part? So there's this paradox despite that. And I think this is what's going on, okay? This is the Tsiolkovsky's model of cognitive behavioral therapy, okay? And it's the idea is that what drives fear, if you have an anxiety issue, is your perception that it's really bad and it's really likely to happen and you just can't cope, okay? So for instance, the best story of this is someone, I don't know if how many of you have been to London. We've got a very big car park in London called the M25. It's our motorway, our freeway, that goes all around the outside of London. And it's a classic sort of, what would normally be a 10-minute journey sometimes can take 3 hours in the morning or in the evening. And there are people who are convinced, and it's a particular London phenomenon, that their car will break down. They will be stuck in lots and lots of traffic on a 5-lane highway. They won't be able to get to the side. Their phone won't work. They won't be able to call for help. And there's a new phobia that we are seeing that we're having to treat about people being stuck in really severe traffic around London. So they've got an abnormal perception. It's like, okay, it's an inconvenience for most people if you're stuck in traffic for an hour or two. The worst thing that could happen, you might miss a flight or something like that. But for these people, it's like the worst thing that could possibly happen in their lives. They think it's going to happen every single day. They can't cope with it. Their phone won't work. There won't be anyone they can phone for help, and so on and so forth. And there'll be no police passing who can help rescue them and so on and so forth. And this is exactly the same thing we have in food allergy, that you think you're going to die. You think it's really likely you're going to die. You can't do anything about it. You're on your own if it happens. And that's what's driving anxiety and food allergy. But what we do with desensitization is this. As well as desensitizing the body, we desensitize the psychology, the brain, both the person and the family, the parents as well. So their perception of severity isn't as bad. They might be having reactions every day, but if you're having reactions every day and actually you're surviving those and you get used to them, your perception of how bad it can be suddenly changes. And you're coping. And so all of a sudden, your ability to cope goes up. And if you have anaphylaxis and you use an adrenaline pen and you get better, suddenly you can cope with it. You can do something about it. The rescue factors go up. And that's probably why immunotherapy works longer term for quality of life. And it's probably why people still want this despite the fact they're going to have reactions. And one of the things we showed in London is that when we do food challenges at the start, before immunotherapy, to see, are you allergic? Do you really need the treatment? 1/3 of the improvement people report following treatment is purely due to that food challenge. That's why I love food challenges, because they no longer think they're going to react with a really bad reaction to the tiniest amount, and it tells you so much information. And that's why, for me personally, I know lots of people disagree with me, but for me personally, before you do a treat with food allergy, we should be doing food challenges, because studies show up to 3 out of 10 people saying, I want treatment, don't actually need it, because they're not allergic enough or not allergic at all, especially if they're young. It teaches the family, the patient, and us how that person reacts. It builds a relationship with the family that is crucial for them to trust you and for you to trust them, that they'll contact you if they're having problems at home. And it identifies those patients who are more likely to bump around, where you need to go more carefully. You can't just charge through the protocol. So, what are we trying to achieve? I would argue we need the SU, the sustained unresponsiveness, because of this, okay? 50% of people undergoing food allergy treatment to peanut allergy report very significant taste aversion, okay? I have a whole load of patients who started off loving chocolate, and a year down the line, because they eat chocolate with their peanuts to try and mask the flavor, they no longer like chocolate. And some parents are very happy about that, of course. But fundamentally, this is a major barrier towards people taking their dose every single day, which is really what's needed. And so that's where we need to, I think, aim for sustained unresponsiveness, which is hard, okay? Under half of children who complete peanut treatment are tolerant after you stopping the dosing for 2 months. Same for egg. Only 1/3 have this sustained unresponsiveness. For milk, same, 30% only have this sustained treatment response. And the best study, perhaps, that we've had so far is a POISED study from the USA, from Stanford. And this is what they did. There were 3 groups, and you can see them at the bottom. There was a placebo group for the whole time, and then there was a group that had 20 peanuts every single day for 2 years, and then they stopped. And then there was a group that had 20 peanuts for every single day for 2 years, and then they dropped down to 2 peanuts a day. So there's still a little bit going in every single day. And so the placebo group, you can see very quickly, there's absolutely no sustained response, unexpected, as you'd expect, because they didn't have any treatment. The treatment groups, after 2 years, the one who stopped, so just a year later, only 13% could still tolerate peanut at food challenge. If they dropped to the 1.5, 2 peanuts, that became 37%, okay? And this is the issue. The longer term outcomes are not looking particularly good. And I've got a whole load of patients, some of whom are now in medical school, a couple of whom are now qualified as doctors, who I treated over the last 10 years, where they did it for 3 years, they had lots of anaphylaxis, they then decided they don't want to have their peanut every single day, they stopped, and they come back and tell me that's the best thing they've ever done. They're no longer so scared about having reactions, but they're still allergic. They know what to do, but they don't want to carry on the treatment. And that's one of the reasons why in the UK we haven't treated 3,000 people, because by the time you talk to people and tell them what's involved and what it looks like at the end, they're like, we don't want this. So I've already touched on the immunotherapy bit. We're still running scared of the severe allergy, the people who've had really bad reactions. We're still too scared to treat them. And they're the ones, actually, who are probably going to benefit most. It's very easy. If you look at the private clinics in Europe and in America doing this, half the patients they're treating can already eat a peanut or two without anything happening. And then everyone else, they're not particularly allergic. And so the way it's going to end up happening is that the people who need this most are only going to be able to access it through public systems, and we're going to be running scared about actually doing that, which is not a great scenario. Now, some of you may have heard or read that apparently this is easier in babies and very young school kids. And the suggestion has been maybe we should be treating people when they're 2 and 3 rather than waiting until they're teenagers. And if you look at the studies that have been done, the numbers look not too bad. Desensitization, 60-70% compared to 50-60% in older children. The longer-term outcomes, most people don't bother assessing that. Now, no study yet has compared young kids to older kids directly. Okay, that's one of the reasons we're doing the Natasha study in the UK. But there have been studies with Palforzia, that peanut product, not at the same time, and the protocol's slightly different, but not too different. And you'll see that in grey, the 1 to 4-year-olds in the Poseidon study didn't really do much better than the older kids, aged 4 to 17. And so at the moment, I really don't think there's much evidence to suggest this is safer, better, more effective in the youngest kids. The one study where there is a little bit of data is a study from Australia, the PPOET3 study, where they had a 1 to 5-year group and a 6 to 10-year group. Now, 1 to 5 is probably already a little bit too old. The 4 and 5-year-olds, I think, behaved more like the older kids. But you can see there, no big difference really for desensitization, but there was a bit of difference in the longer-term outcome of sustained unresponsiveness, 58 versus 37%. But 1 in 5 needed adrenaline at some stage, okay? This is a noisy treatment, and it needs a lot of intensive hands-on support. And the interesting thing that came out of that Australian study, and I think this is relevant for our daily practice, is that it's not age that seems to make the treatment better, it's what the underlying IgE level is, okay? And younger people, 2 and 3-year-olds, have lower IgEs to peanut, milk, walnuts, compared to 9, 10, 11-year-olds, teenagers. The same applies for aeroallergens. We see the same in allergic asthma as well. And so once you correct for that, there's no impact of age. It's purely what's that IgE level, okay? And maybe we should be going in for 1 and 2-year-olds, if we can, because their IgE levels are lower, and they're more likely to do well in treatment. But then we need to be more careful that the parents are really receptive to what's happening in their very young child, who can't easily go, "Mum, I don't like the taste of peanuts, I've got tummy ache," or something like that. So we've got to really be careful here. And then finally, I'm just going to touch on omalizumab, Xolair, because there's been a lot of press about this, not just for asthma, but it's now been approved in the USA for treating food allergy as well. And there's a lot of delightful hoo-ha about it, you know, where you do much better a couple of months dosing on omalizumab, and 70-75% of people can tolerate, 10 peanuts at food challenge just with a couple of injections, which is wonderful. Now, if you put them side by side with the oral immunotherapy, this is Palforzia, you can see it's about 70%. So Xolair is as good as immunotherapy, okay, in terms of efficacy outcomes. But this is a problem, okay? These are UK healthcare costs. Palforzia, it costs £4,000 in the UK for 1 year of treatment. Plus, you're meant to have 12 hospital visits, so that's probably another £4,000. Actually, in America, that's about £20,000-30,000. But we're quite cheap in the UK for hospital visits on the public health system. And that's for 1 year, so £8,000 for 1 year. If you use peanut from a supermarket, £10 max, okay? And you maybe can get away with a few visits to hospital, so maybe £1,000 to £2,000. That might be more cost-effective, more doable, okay? Omalizumab, in the UK, for 1 year, you're looking at £13,000, okay? If you were to give those medicines at home, which you can now do for omalizumab, that's another maybe £1,000. It's still cheaper than coming to hospital every month. And as soon as you stop the omalizumab, the treatment effect goes. So you've got £8,000 compared to £2,000 compared to £14,000, £15,000, okay? This is the reality on the ground. Which treatment might we choose as doctors if we are in charge of a budget? Which treatment might a government choose, particularly if they're not funding any of this at the moment? Are they, a couple of £1,000 for all the people with food allergy? That's going to add up quite quickly. So, where does this leave us? Oral immunotherapy causes lots of adverse events, including anaphylaxis. We've got to teach parents and our patients how to deal with that. They've got to have that conversation from the start so they're expecting it. Taste aversion is a massive issue, and we need to be careful on how that impacts on longer-term treatment. There's no point doing it for a year if you think you're going to be able to stop after a year. This is 3 to 4, 5 years, and then probably you're still going to need to carry it on afterwards. We've got to match the patient goals, and I'd say the family goals as well, with the treatment. And there's a lot of safety netting that we need to make sure that we don't kill people with this by accident. And that's where this shared decision model, this discussion between healthcare professionals and the family and the child or young person themselves in deciding what's needed, what's not needed, the impacts of avoiding sports near the time of dosing, which is a massive issue if your child likes doing sports and PE and physical exercise. It's a major issue. And finally, I'm just going to raise a tiny concern that many of us have, that for something like peanut allergy or walnut allergy, the majority of children are not going to outgrow those. So there's a rationale for saying, okay, let's treat them. But for something like milk allergy or egg allergy, where most young children will outgrow it, 80% will outgrow it by the time they start school, there is some evidence that if you force treatment, force the body's immune system to become tolerant, you get a very different response from if you let things happen naturally. And it may well be that those people who are saying, let's desensitize babies, let's do milk immunotherapy or peanut immunotherapy in babies, you're actually going to end up in 8 out of 10 kids with a less good result than if you just let them grow a few years and see if they naturally outgrow it. And we do need more research, more data here everywhere to see whether we're actually potentially doing some harm or a less good result by forcing the body to become tolerant at too early an age. So thank you for listening. Questions? Okay. And it's my great pleasure to introduce someone who I'm sure you don't know, because he's not been up here a couple of times already, Ratko, who's going to tell us very much about the management of asthma in adults. And I guess I feel very young, okay, because Ratko graduated from Belgrade when I was 4 years old. He moved to Southampton and was promoted to professor when I started training as a pediatric doctor. He became a professor and then got promoted again to a different sort of professor, which I didn't know can happen, when I became a specialist in allergy immunology in Australia. And I feel that, and I think one of the reasons that I've managed to become very successful is because my generation is standing on the shoulders of some incredible people who have come beforehand. And it's my pleasure to introduce one of those people to you guys now.